Good morning. Welcome parents, students, and friends to the 32nd edition of the Carlisle Middle School 8th grade forum. Forum is an annual tradition that has become a rite of passage for our 8th grade students. It was originally developed in 1990 by Mrs. Linda Gibson in conjunction with the late Mrs. Peggy Ford. Forum is a formal research paper on important, current, or historical topics. The History and English departments coordinate the Forum program to enable students to develop critical reading and writing skills using historical analysis, primary and secondary sources, and contemporary media. They investigate assigned topics and create a multi-draft research paper, which is ultimately crafted into a short oral presentation. Let us now take this opportunity to recognize our 8th grade students for all of their hard work. I would also like to thank all of the 8th grade parents for their advice and support during this complex project. So thank you. Finally, I would like to thank Mrs. Linda Gibson and Mrs. Meredith Nicoletti for their countless hours of advising, coaching, reading rough drafts, making corrections and suggestions, and instilling in their students the importance of always doing their best work. Thank you so much. Your efforts are greatly appreciated. Now let's welcome this morning's panelists. Gracie Agnew has served in education for 45 years. After graduating from high school, she chose to attend Winston-Salem State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in English. She began her teaching career in 1974 for the Henry County school system. Virginia Tech awarded her a Master's of Arts in Education in 1985. And from the University of Virginia, she earned an endorsement in supervision and administration. In addition to being an English teacher, she has served as adjunct faculty for Patrick Henry Community College, an administrative intern, assistant principal, director of secondary instruction, an educational consultant, as well as a university supervisor for Longwood University. Currently, her role is Carlisle's head of school. With the exception of 3 years in North Carolina, all of her professional experience has been in Virginia. She has been on numerous boards, including the Harvest Foundation, Piedmont Community Services, and NCI. Currently, she is on the following boards: CHIL, Boys and Girls Club, Regional Library. One of her greatest honors was being named the Virginia State Principal of the Year in 2013. Welcome, Mrs. Agnew. Haddon Probst is our senior student panelist this morning. Haddon lives in Greensboro, North Carolina, and is in this year's graduating class of 2021. She has been attending Carlisle School since preschool 4. Haddon is the daughter of Ron and Lee Probst. Her brother Henry is a sophomore at Page High School. Haddon is the SCA president of the upper school. She wants to double major in psychology and elementary education with a minor in Spanish when she begins her college in the fall. She enjoys playing field hockey and soccer. Haddon fondly remembers working with Mrs. Gibson on her own forum project on the topic of single-sex education, focusing on women's college. Welcome, Haddon. Now to our first two speakers. Abby Blankenship is the daughter of Miss Molly Denon. She lives with her grandmother, Mrs. Jet Wood, in Martinsville. Outside, she enjoys soccer. Inside, she bakes and plays video games and has an eye for design. Abby is the lead-off speaker of our pandemic series, discussing the grisly history of the medieval Black Plague. Riley Wood has been at Carlisle since kindergarten. She is the daughter of Jerry and Joanna Wood of Martinsville. Her brother Mason is in 4th grade. Riley is quite athletic, playing varsity basketball, varsity soccer, and travel soccer, water skiing, dance, and to relax, she walks her dog Tucker. Riley also has participated in middle school dramas, The Little Mermaid, Lion King, Wizard of Oz, and The Magical Dinner. She serves as middle school vice president and plans to become a pediatric surgeon. The Spanish flu of 1918 was a worldwide killer that dwarfs the current pandemic in several ways. Riley will give us the particulars. I would like to welcome now Abby Blankenship to the podium.
In October of 1347, 12 trading ships came into the port of Messina, Sicily. People at the docks found a horrifying sight. Nearly all the sailors were dead. Those who were near death looked sickly and had black spots leaking blood and pus. These ships were known as death ships. This was just the beginning of the bubonic plague. Striking Europe in 1348, the Black Plague was an unstoppable disease that killed 1/3 of Europe's population. The bubonic plague was an epidemic that spread from Asia to Europe along the Silk Road. This plague was an epidemic in China from the 1330s to the 1350s. This caused millions of deaths throughout Asia. The plague was transmitted in many ways. One was a simple touching of clothes of a healthy person by an infected person. Even just a small cough or sneeze infected others. One of the most common methods of transmission was getting bitten by fleas or ticks. Fleas and ticks had the plague, then would transmit the disease. The fleas would bite an infected rat. The rats would die, then the flea would need a new host such as a human. They would jump from person to person, causing more and more people to be infected with the bubonic plague. Many people mistakenly thought it was caused by rats. However, scientists later discovered that fleas were the actual transmitters to humans. The plague was caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. This bacteria was commonly found in the rodent population. In people, the bubonic plague caused a bacterial infection. The bacteria would grow inside the flea, causing a blockade to the stomach. Then, once it bit a human, it would regurgitate the blockade of the disease into the person's bloodstream, causing a bacterial infection. The people who were infected had a painful death due to all the symptoms. The most common symptom was buboes, swollen lymph nodes the size of eggs. They would start to spread around the body, and black spots would then be visible and were seen near the thigh and arm. They normally grew around the armpit and groin where bacteria enters the human body. Additional symptoms include fever, headache, and chills. After having the plague for a few days, the infected would die after the 6th to 10th day, if the victim was lucky. The bacteria also grew in the brain, kidney, and lungs. 95% of people died. Attempts to get rid of the plague failed. The plague did not have a cure, and it was quite hard to treat effectively. People tried to prevent the spread. One way would be to stay away from the infected. Sitting next to a hot fire was considered to be effective. It said it worked for the Pope. At home, people would close windows and doors, pray at church, or they would join flagellants. Flagellants are people who would go to town, beating themselves with a whip with sharp metal. They thought if they washed themselves, God would stop the plague. Many doctors tried the cure of the plague with treatments such as bloodletting, boil lancing, bathing in vinegar, or rose water. The doctor would wear long robes, a long bird-like mask, and boots. The bird mask was so the doctor could breathe safely in the air of the presence of the patient. The robe and boots were protection from the fleas and ticks. When the plague got worse, the doctors would stop seeing patients, so most of them turned to religion instead of medication. People did religious practices that were thought to work. The doctors did not understand anything about the immune system then, and did not know how to treat it or stop it. When it got to this point, people tried to run away from the plague hotspots into the countryside. This did not work due to all the animals having the infected fleas. Although the bubonic plague is not a major health concern anymore, it still exists. There were waves for many years at a time, but now there is more sanitation. Since there have been many more public health measurements since the 1300s, there is a less chance of disease from many illnesses. Though the bubonic plague is not fully gone, there is still medication for the bubonic plague according to the World Health Organization. At least 1,000 to 3,000 people get infected with the bubonic plague yearly, though the mortality rate has dropped. The death rate used to be around 60% or more. It has dropped to 11%. Now scientists use techniques like genome mapping, and this has found many strains of bacteria. The genome mapping has also found information about the bubonic plague origin and made it easy to track the waves and location. The bubonic plague killed millions of people from Asia all across Europe. Countries were unprepared as they had few treatments that worked. Although the bubonic plague came in waves, it finally fizzled out, but left destruction in its wake. Even though the bubonic plague is no longer a global threat, it is still the stuff of legends.
You did a wonderful job. Fear brings out the worst in people when you are just terrified of something. Sometimes people that are just normally rational, they become totally irrational. What were some of the worst behaviors of humans in reacting to that plague? What were some of the things that they did that surprised you or horrified you or saddened you with the way that they behaved?
Well, it was kind of like how people reacted to COVID-19. They would start getting really confused and would go crazy. And sometimes there would be robberies or people invading and attacking. And of course they closed schools and tried to stay away, but they all really freaked out over the fact that there's this huge plague. So a lot of crazy things did in fact happen.
Excellent. This story, what you spoke about reminds me of a story about Edgar Allan Poe, The Mask of the Red Death, where you have this Prince Prospero who tries to go to his abbey and bring all of the rich people, his friends, but they were the only ones there because he wanted to escape the Red Death. In thinking about that and what was happening with the bubonic plague, did it work when people tried to isolate themselves?
I'm pretty sure it did work when they tried to stay away in their homes, but also since their houses weren't built quite well, fleas could still get in and rats can get in and they could get sick.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I also agree with Ms. Agnew. Your topic was outstanding, very interesting. My question was, why do you think that they relied on religion instead of medication?
Because it didn't work very well, considering they tried many things that they could think of then.
Okay, thank you.
We will now hear from Riley Wood and her findings on the Spanish flu of 1918.
Miss Edna Boone, born in 1907 in Houston County, Alabama, lived through the Spanish flu epidemic. Of the 200 people living there, hers was the only family that never contracted the virus. At 10 years old, she made soup and brought it to the doorsteps of infected families. The one doctor in her area had infected people lined up outside his front door every day. We all suffered losses in one way or another, if not from the war, then from the epidemic, said Ms. Boone. The pandemic of 1918 is the deadliest pandemic in modern history. It appeared near the end of World War I with respiratory symptoms and came in 3 waves. Though governments took steps to deal with it, the death toll was between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. Fort Riley in Kansas was where the Spanish flu cases first appeared. Contact on the battlefield is partially to blame for the spread. Soldiers lived in unsanitary conditions which weakened their immune systems, causing them to be susceptible to the flu. When soldiers went on leave, they brought the virus home with them, infecting their families. In 1918, people assumed the Spanish flu originated in Spain, but now historians believe the Spanish flu originated in Haskell County, Kansas, near Fort Riley. Haskell County was big on pig farming. Bird influenza viruses and human influenza viruses can infect pigs. When a bird virus and a human virus infect a pig's cells, it can create a new and deadly virus. Spain was the only country publicizing the fact there was a new virus. They were neutral during World War I, so they did not hesitate to report it. No other countries wanted to let people know the pandemic was affecting their troops because they would be forced to stop fighting. According to a report by Henry Davies, an English poet, the epidemic is of mild nature, no deaths have been reported. 2 weeks later, over 100,000 cases have been reported in Madrid, Spain alone. In Fort Riley, on September 7, 1918, a soldier went to the hospital screaming and delirious when diagnosed with meningitis. When dozens more soldiers were hospitalized with the same symptoms, doctors changed the diagnosis to influenza. The most common symptoms of the Spanish flu were headache, fatigue, dry cough, loss of appetite, and upset stomach and excessive sweating. There were also possible complications with pneumonia. Most people died within days or even hours after developing symptoms. Most people were masked in public and tried to steer clear of crowded places. Suggestions were drinking wine and beef broth or eating cinnamon. They even suggested keeping feet dry, gargling salt water, and getting fresh air. To alleviate symptoms, doctors prescribe 30 grams of aspirin, which is now known as toxic. For comparison, today, doses above 4 grams are considered to be unsafe. Formamints were an over-the-counter pill originally used for sore eyes. They were falsely advertised as a cure for the virus so people could make money from selling the tablets. The Spanish flu came in 3 waves. During the first wave of the Spanish flu, not many people feared the virus because it mainly infected soldiers. In the beginning, the infectious rate was high, but few died. The British Grand Fleet admitted over 10,000 patients in May, and by June, only 4 died. French troops dismissed the virus as a 3-day fever. Half of British troops and 3/4 of French troops were infected by the end of the spring of 1918. The second wave of the Spanish flu was the most deadly, causing up to 40 million casualties. It hit the United States in the late summer of 1918. It was brought to the U.S. through soldiers returning home from war and carrying the virus with them. During the second wave, the first civilian cases in the U.S. were spotted in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The third wave came fast and unexpected at the beginning of January in 1919. Most stores were opening back up and everyone stopped wearing masks. Small businesses, theaters, and schools refused to shut down for a second time. In 2007, an analysis showed if San Francisco had kept their mandates through the spring of 1919, their deaths could have been reduced by 90%. William Cursor, Philadelphia's public health director, told the public the virus many soldiers were catching was the seasonal flu. They even held a parade because Cursor refused to cancel public events. 3 days after the parade, 30 civilians were hospitalized, and by the end of the week, 2,600 people died. Before a case of the Spanish flu was spotted in St. Louis, Dr. Max Stockwell, health commissioner, wrote an editorial to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and ordered people to avoid crowded places. Once the first case was spotted, Stockwell closed schools, shut down theaters, and banned all public gatherings. William Stevens, the governor of California, stated it was the patriotic duty of every American citizen to wear a mask. There was a $5 fine if they were caught in public not wearing a mask or wearing it improperly, which is equivalent to about $100 today. There was a unique aspect to the Spanish flu. The seasonal flu affected infants or elders more often, but with the Spanish flu, mainly adults between the ages of 20 and 40 died. In 2008, researchers discovered the Spanish flu is made up of 3 genes that weaken the bronchial tubes and lungs, paving the way for bacterial pneumonia. People born after 1889 were more vulnerable to the 1918 Spanish flu because they had not yet been exposed to a similar virus that people born before 1889 had been exposed to. Therefore, people in their 20s and 30s were more vulnerable because they had not built up an immunity. Over 25% of the U.S. population at some point had become infected. The virus killed almost 700,000 Americans. The virus had such an astronomical impact on America that the life expectancy rate dropped to 12 years and the death rate was up to 5% worldwide. The virus infected 500 million people around the world, which is equivalent to 36% of the world population. In all, up to 100 million people died globally, which is more than World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined, making it the deadliest pandemic in modern history.
Riley, that was very interesting. I kind of saw how with the United States, how similar it was. My question for you was, what was the most difficult part of the form process?
The research aspect was very difficult because there weren't, the record keeping back in 1918 was not very good. So definitely the researching process, figuring out the numbers, understanding, just trying to, it was difficult to understand, wow, this happened 100 years ago and it's happening again. I thought that was crazy.
Well, I loved your topic as well, and you did an excellent job. And hadn't actually touched on my question as well. To better prepare us for future pandemics, pandemics. I think it was the World Health Organization, maybe the CDC. But what they decided to do was to replicate that virus in a safe and regulated lab. Do you think that they were successful in light of the fact that now we have this pandemic? And they were supposed to be helping us to understand it so that nothing like this would ever happen again.
Yeah, so I don't really think that they did a great job, because I had never heard of the Spanish flu before COVID. I had never heard of it. I had never even really heard of pandemic before. So in my opinion, I really didn't think that they did a good, people did a good enough job of, showing us, back in history this happened before, and nobody told me that it could ever happen again.
It's like having the knowledge and then being prepared, for it. So I do understand what you're saying. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job.